Fast Forward Productions. The women are speaking.
Well, this has been a week.
Yeah. I think, this is to the listeners. We like to kick off most of our podcasts with some banter, something kind of funny that's happened. We like to make people smile. Well, and I think most of our life is smiling. It is enjoying moments, and we have a pretty good life. We do share struggles, but I wouldn't say the struggles are pervasive. At the same time, we like this podcast to be something that is personal and somewhat reflective of our life because we like to be real and vulnerable and open. What happened this week is something that we felt was worth sharing, kind of how it affected us and what happened. And so,
yeah, I guess
there won't be much smiling on today's podcast.
Well, there probably will be, but that happens too.
Not from humor.
To timestamp it, because these are released after the fact, it's July the 20th, which is Saturday. We're recording this a bit late in the schedule because this week just got away from us a bit.
If you listen to it on release date, you'll be listening to it on July 31st when things happen.
It's a few weeks
prior
to listening date, but honestly, I'm not even sure where to begin, whether we talk about ourselves here or talk about Abby.
Yeah, so I guess to drop the bomb, which if you're a member of the Fernie community, you'll know what we're talking about. We heard on Thursday afternoon from a friend that a very key community member and friend had suddenly died in a highway car collision. This occurred on Wednesday night, just outside of Fernie, about an hour away in Crow's Nest. We're somewhat new to the Fernie community, but I think it was last summer we first met Abby, who was the person who passed away. Her name is Abi Moore. And that was hard, of course, to hear. And so we're going to talk about that. Meredith and I had a lot of conversations after getting that news the last couple of days. And then we did a post that was along the lines of some of the conversations that we had, which was posted on Friday, July 19th, if you want to go back and look at that one. And I thought, because we like to share parts of our life, the good stuff and the hard stuff, it would be nice to share some of these conversations with the listeners. So that's what this podcast is. I think initially for me, we had an argument that was not one of our best on Wednesday night. And so we woke up on Thursday. We had kind of repaired the argument, but we're still raw from it because it got pretty intense, which they tend to for us sometimes. We're working on it, but they can. We're intense people. Immediately for me, it brought perspective. Everything that I had been feeling towards you dissipated. The negative stuff, the raw stuff from the argument. It really brought into perspective what we're here for and what really matters.
Yeah, just immediately gone, I think. I tend to kind of linger in some feelings after we have arguments. I think because of, I don't know why, just because I do. And it takes me some time to snap out of it. So I usually have kind of a day after I'm not able to get right back into our relationship in a particularly well-connected way. And I was still feeling a lot of that when, we heard this news, and it was, you talk about something just leaving your mind immediately. All those feelings, the lingering depression or anxiety that I feel after we have fights was just gone in a flash, and unfortunately replaced with a different kind of sadness. Yeah, I've experienced loss before of people close to me. I lost my best friend when I was 9. She died of a brain aneurysm suddenly. I lost one of my sweet mates in university in a car accident. But there's something about this one that felt really very close, and it was just immediately hard to come to terms with. I don't think you have as a child necessarily the perspective or awareness of what death is to make a lot of sense of it. I remember when my parents told me about my friend passing away, I didn't really know what that meant. And then even at her funeral, you're there, you see her mom, the adults are very, very affected and very sad. But, as a child, you're there with schoolmates and you don't feel it in the same way, even though you're very close with that person. And then I don't know what it is in university. And, maybe you can speak to this, having lost someone when you were that age, very close to you. That loss was hard. I remember when I heard the news feeling extremely sad, but it didn't linger like this. And I don't know if that's because you're just a little more self-absorbed when you're in your 20s. Your life is going on, you're hyper-focused on socializing and stress related to that time that you don't really linger in it. And there's something about getting older, I think, because you empathize immediately. Like you feel it for yourself, having lost a friend and someone that you're close to, and, you know, however close you are to her, you feel immediately empathetic for Mike, her husband. You can draw, at least for me and for us, so many parallels between their lives and our lives. They're both very active. They do everything together. They don't have kids. They have 2 dogs. They are very involved in mountain sports. And it's just like, wow, that's us. And then for someone like Abi, who was such a pillar in the community in Fernie, you just immediately feel this wash of like, this is going to crush people.
You feel so much sadness and empathy, for her husband and her family. But then like almost every single person I know in Fernie was friends with her.
Yeah.
And so you feel sadness for all of those people. And I think part of it is just like our community is, and again, we're new to it, but it's so small, especially, you know, being in the kind of the athletic part of the Fernie community, the running group. You know, even if, you know, we aren't attending the run club every single week, we've attended it a couple of times and we're doing the races that were held by her organization. And, you know, we follow each other on Strava and we see her at events and we see friends of hers at events.
Actually, I started running into her when I was swimming. And then we did, I think it was Christmas last year, the Elk Valley Swim Club put on a 5K swim, which is a long swim for even people who are experienced swimmers.
You're like, I'll just dust off my goggles and do a 5K.
Well, I had been swimming. That time. Yeah. And she was there for that. And we all did it. And I remember I finished before her and there weren't very many people who were getting out of the pool and smiling about that experience because it becomes very painful and arduous and repetitive. But as she does, she just hopped out of the pool and, you know, in her way was smiling like, okay, well, that's done. And then I remember we were sitting in the pool in Fernie has this hot tub that's off to the side. And so people were finishing and kind of just going over to sit in the hot tub because you get really cold. And, you know, I was chatting with some of them. She came in and that's where I learned a little bit more about her. I struggle when I meet people to remember faces all the time. Like I'll meet someone and I will get their name and I will learn about them. But sometimes then I run into them later and I can't quite recall what they look like. And it makes it hard in certain situations to not introduce yourself to someone who you've met before or just like...
Well, I think too, being new in Fernie at that point.
You're meeting a lot of people.
Yeah, we were meeting a lot.
You put a swim cap on somebody and it becomes even harder to remember a face because you're like, well, I don't even know what your hair looks like or what you look like when you aren't wet. But Abi has this smile that is almost always out. It is this very like defining feature of her. It was immediately memorable and it made her very easy to pick out when we would come across her at community events down the road and just see her. It's like, oh, it's Abi. She's a very memorable person. And then one of the Run Club events that was out at the Nordic Center, it was like the end of the season or something, but it was a big event that our friend Mel was involved with. I think it was maybe Stag's Leap Run Club and the Fernie Trail Alliance doing a joint event. I think a lot of people probably would be surprised to see us in group settings and how introverted we both are. I struggle with big groups of people, especially to be the one to, you know, just wander around and introduce myself and be very outgoing. In that way, I find it really stressful. And I think you do too. And so we were doing what we do when the two of us are in that situation together, which is kind of just, you know, move around as a unit and
cling on to the one person that we know.
Yeah, which is Mel, but she's hard to cling on to. So I think we were standing off maybe to ourselves a bit and had exhausted all of the people that we did know, talking to them about whatever. And so we were maybe contemplating leaving and Abi came up and I think she introduced herself to you and started chatting. And we sat there and talked with her for 15 or 20 minutes about how she came to Fernie because she's from the UK. So she has an accent. So you kind of wonder always when you hear someone with that accent, how did you get here? And so she told us that. And we were talking, she's worked for Fernie Brewing for a long time. And we were talking about that. She's in marketing and I find that very interesting. She was telling us all about how their whole model and business kind of shifted during COVID because people weren't, you know, at pubs getting draft beers. Everybody was at home. And so what they were having was in cans and how they had to kind of pivot to that. And, you know, it ended up being a good thing for that company. And, you know, for someone to just walk over and take 15 or 20 minutes out of their time to.
She also, when I was learning more about her after this week, because that's what I did, I actually didn't know that she was as involved as she was, embarrassingly. Like, she actually started the Run Club and Stag Leap and like is the organizer and like owns the big 50K running race here. I knew she was impactful because of just who she was and how she made me feel on that day. I didn't understand how much of a pillar she was in specifically the running community. And then I had heard her getting talked about on the ski hill because we had seen her skiing down underneath the chairlift with Mel. And she was like, that's who you're going to want to take lessons with if you take lessons with anybody.
Yeah, that was kind of her thing early on, I think, with ski instructing. And she's very good.
So there was supposed to be the 50K Elk Valley Ultra next week, and that was canceled yesterday. I think it's just a little bit, I think probably for most people involved, a little too close, a little too soon to be trying to organize something, even in the last week. I remember when my sister passed away, it was hard to do anything that would make that hole feel bigger. Like it was like, you know, those like family gatherings. It was clear that one of us was missing. Whereas like if you just kind of do day-to-day things, it's not as obvious. Of course, it still is there. You know, when my sister died, a lot of things shifted. We just didn't do a lot that would make us feel like she was missing. And I think that's probably part of what that race would be for a lot of people. So that was canceled. I can't even imagine what it's like for a lot of her close like friends and family at this point. But,
you know, I guess everybody experiences loss in their own way. And it's one of the 3 types of suffering. One of them is the suffering of impermanence, and that includes life. There are many things that are impermanent in life. It's not just our lives, but you're really faced with that. And whether you're connected very closely to someone or more distantly, like you feel it in your own way. And that is humbling and softening and does provide a lot of perspective. I had a therapy appointment booked for yesterday, which was Friday. I found this really wonderful therapist, but she's in Cranbrook, which is like an hour from Fernie, and she only works on Fridays. So it's a bit of a chore to get out there every couple of weeks, but it's found her really, really helpful. I contemplated not going just because of some of the feelings that I was having. I didn't know how to go in there and talk about our relationship or some of the struggles that we've been having or I've been having prior to this news. It felt very small and very petty, and just like, how do you do that? How do you go in there and have your little problems and worries and annoyances and talk about them in earnest when something like this is just sort of rock the foundation that you're on a bit? But I kept it, and I didn't know what I was going to talk about. I just sort of was committed to showing up and seeing what happened. And I showed up and just promptly sort of lost my cool. And I think for me, loss and death just brings up a lot of baggage with my more personal experiences with loss and death with my mom. And what we talked about was kind of the unresolved nature of that. And, you know, when someone's life ends abruptly, it is fundamentally unresolved in your head. You start thinking about why or what was said. Like, you know, with my mom, there were a lot of things I wish I had said, but I didn't get the chance to. That's what came up for me. And I wasn't necessarily prepared to go there in any way at all. And I just was sort of, all of a sudden you're there. I'm glad I kept that appointment because it's really the first time I've talked about it, and I've had someone who really knows what they're doing be on the other end of it and have something more to say. Then that's really hard. And I can understand why you're struggling, like to have someone who can sit there and say, well, what would you say? And kind of walk through that, which of course I think about and I've thought about before what I would say, but I've never just gone through the exercise of actually doing it and saying it and having someone, you know, say, well, when you do that and when you say it, can you picture her? Like, is she hearing you? Is she receiving that? And how does knowing that make you feel? That was kind of an unexpected thing that happened, and in a way, kind of a gift that came out of it. And it was a hard session, and we talked a lot about loss and grief and what makes grieving hard. And it's all the holes and the unknowns and the inability to close a circle. And that's why I think we ask so many questions when people are lost and when they pass away, because our minds, they don't do well with a lack of information. They don't do well when they can't close that circle of understanding. That is what is so easy to get stuck in. And the great lesson in loss and in grief and the constant practice is one of acceptance. It's accepting that you can't know some things. You'll never know. And you have to be able to accept that to move forward and to hold that grief and not let it consume you. And if you can do that, I think that that's where loss and wretchedness and these really terrible things can work to soften us and humble us and provide perspective and provide a lot of contrast that lets us feel truly happy and joyful, because without that, you don't realize how wonderful life really is and can be. And even little moments, like the tiniest moments, are just these enormous celebrations of what a miracle it is to still be here. She had some interesting things to say about emotions and feelings and how our society doesn't really allow for people to spend a lot of time in these big, terrible feelings. She said when you go to other countries and you go to funerals, they have these wailing periods where people just get together and they just wail and they let their emotions come out in this really raw, primal, pure way. They just feel it and it comes out. And she said it's really healing to do that. And you know, on the other hand, our society, when you see people who are in pain and who are grieving and who've lost something very important to them or someone, you know, you often hear they're so strong, because people can be very stoic through it. And, you know, they still go to work, or they stand up and give a eulogy at a funeral, and they keep themselves together, or they show up for other family members. And you often hear that they're so strong because they're continuing to show up and they're not consumed by this. But it's almost like, don't you want to be consumed by it for just a short time and be able to be in it and let it come out of you in whatever kind of way? And she said to me, because I kept having these moments in that session where I would just kind of, these emotions would just come out, and then I have to sit there for a minute because I can't talk. She said even the way, like the pattern that I'm seeing with you is these feelings are coming up, but then you just work so hard to get them to go away. Sort of clench your jaw, white knuckle, work your hands, do whatever you have to do to get them to go back down. And that's, you know, a little micro example of the way that we sort of live with grief and with feelings and the way that we move through the world. And so she said, if you want some homework, I would suggest in the next week or so, just go out in the woods and find a log or something that's on the ground and just have at it. Just go to town, let it out, see what happens. She's like, you don't have to commit to anything more than just hitting that log one time, and then just see if you want to do it again.
Just make sure it's safe.
Yeah, of course.
I used to do that with my golf clubs on the golf course, and it is very cathartic.
Yeah. In certain moments.
Definitely not appropriate in our society, but I did it anyways.
She has this retreat that she runs that's outside of, it's on the Bull River. It's on a ranch, but it's like a meditation retreat, and she is turning out to be a little more oriented in Buddhism than I initially but knew about. And she said one of the things when people go there, we have groups of people who come, and she's like, we keep baseball bats around for exactly that. You'll be in one of the little pavilions or whatever, and you'll see someone walking by with a baseball bat. She's like, a lot of times people will be like, go get it, go let it out. That's what people do there.
For me, my experience with loss is, I've lost 2 grandparents, and there's a difference there. It's just, to me, of course, sad, but when you're older, you've lived a full life. It's expected to a degree. And even my grandma, who died at 82, she got cancer and was healthy until then. It was somewhat sudden, and that was very difficult. And then, of course, everyone knows at this point, my sister passed away from cancer when she was 19. This one it's surprising how impactful it has been to me. It's hard to compare, and I don't think you should, but I think when somebody dies from cancer or old age, it's almost, there isn't that unfinished circle. There's a closure to it. Even with my sister, we were expecting her to recover, so there's still a little bit of space, but you understand why. Whereas with this, it's somebody you take, I don't know, maybe she had health issues. Doesn't seem like she did. An incredibly healthy and active person. And you said somebody you just don't worry about. And it just happened. It's hard for me. It's almost like a disbelief. Because as an adult, especially, I haven't experienced a sudden death close to me. Not even that close, just in my space. It took me probably, 4 or 5 hours for it to be a real thing almost. I also think, you said, with age, even when I lost my sister in college, it was almost somewhat abstract even, because I went to school 3 weeks after I went back up to Alaska after she passed away for my senior year, and no one there said anything. And so it almost was as if it didn't happen. And I'm living in a different space that my sister was never in. I obviously dealt with some issues after that. I've always been somebody who's on the quieter side, but processing everything inside. There was a lot of anger that came out. I don't think anyone really understood. And I think that's the difference is everyone is more consumed in college. And like, you can't relate because you've only had so much life experience. Like, you can't relate to being married to someone or, you know, even knowing people who have kids and like them losing a child. Like, I couldn't even relate to my parents. Like, it just, you know, it was my experience that wasn't really even like valid. It almost seemed. It was, I don't know. I think now like there's a deep, deep feeling of like sadness through like empathy. Of course, it's not easy to imagine a life without you, but it's like, that's part of it. It's like, I can't even imagine not having you. So to imagine someone who has to experience that is like, how? Whereas maybe when you're younger, that doesn't happen in your brain. And I think for me, and I hope with her friends and family, like time heals. I always have found that for me, that's the case, but reestablishing like new connections. I like got pretty severe social anxiety when I got back home after university. And it wasn't until like finding CrossFit and establishing new connections with people as a different person almost helped. And then I think this thing of softness, it's almost like you realize how delicate life is. It's like a real, like almost slap in the face. And one thing that happened when I started like getting very, very close to you was a feeling of losing you, like a fear. And I have that with my parents as well. Like, I think one thing I worry a lot about is like, and I've always worried about this, is like you driving. I don't know if it's because when we're driving together, there's not a nervousness, but when you're by yourself driving to Fernie, or if you're late coming home, my mind goes instantly to like something may have happened. And that kind of almost like brought those fears back up, like, holy moly, you know? But then Mike, her husband, wrote in a post yesterday that he was, I don't have the exact post up, but the words were essentially like, lucky enough to have spent 17 years of his life with Abi. There's comfort in that. And again, like kind of cheesy, but it's like, it's better to have loved and have lost than have never loved at all. It's a cheesy quote, but it's true. And like, you can't take that stuff for granted, those years and that time. And to go, you know, talk about the post next, but it is living in the present, being grateful and having those experiences and living in them while you're experiencing them.
Yeah. And resisting that, you know, looking past them or looking through them, or not cherishing little moments, which are, you don't know how many little moments you have left. There's this story, I'm trying to remember it exactly. It's like a parable. The story is this woman is running from some tigers through the woods, and she's running and running and running, and she can't get away, but then she sees a cliff with a vine that goes off the side. So she grabs the vine and she starts lowering herself down the cliff to get away from the tigers. And she looks down as she's doing that, and she sees at the bottom of the cliff there are more tigers. So now there's tigers at the top of the cliff and there's tigers at the bottom of the cliff. And she looks back at the vine to try to figure out what to do next. And she sees that there's a little mouse chewing at the vine that she's holding on to. And the mouse is going to chew it until it breaks. And she looks off to the side and she sees a strawberry growing through the rocks. And so she picks the strawberry and she eats the strawberry and she enjoys the strawberry. And it's a metaphor for really life and death and how it's inevitable. And, you know, in that moment she stops and eats the strawberry and enjoys it because she doesn't know if she'll ever get to eat a strawberry again.
I didn't know that the vibe could be brought down any lower, but I think he just did that. But also it's a good metaphor and parable.
Yeah. If you are interested in how it actually reads, I would just Google tiger, strawberry, mouse, vine. It'll come right up. But yeah, little moments, which is also, I believe, a Brad Paisley song. So you could listen to that, probably less of a downer.
I guess it's kind of the advice or the quote or whatever it is, like, live like you will die.
We should. That was kind of the post that we put up yesterday, which was Friday, the 19th, if you want to look it up. Because I didn't know, it's hard to really want to be on social media and do anything on it when this has happened. And I don't like feeling or being disingenuous and disrespectful. And frankly, just was not in a headspace to make a post about nutrition
creatine
or workouts or mindset or whatever. So we had taken some footage on our run, and I thought, let's put together a post that is sort of helpful from a more philosophical angle and feels good to put out into the world given this week. And that's what it was kind of about. Do you have the quote up, or do you want me to look it up?
I'll pull up the Instagram. We can play with music.
Okay.
The Dalai Lama, when asked what surprised him most about humanity, said, man, because he sacrifices his health in order to make money, then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. And then he is so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present. The result being that he does not live in the present or the future, if he is never going to die. And then he dies never having lived at all. Man, I mean, it forces you to pull back and recognize, like, it forces you to look at how you're living your life and ask yourself, is this what it's supposed to be like? Is this what I want it to be like?
Is this where I want my energy and my worries and my concerns to be going? And then, the balance, I think, is having, how do you have ambitions with that? And how do you have goals? How do you have both when you're kind of faced with this impermanence? And I think the takeaway in the caption was, like, do have goals, have ambitions, but don't let them blind you to connections and community and the human experience that's right there. Same thing with worries and concerns and anxieties. I think we cause most of our suffering our own. We do. The way that we respond to situations and the way that we let things occupy our mind and the way that we can allow ourselves to run away with anger and frustration and things like that. You don't have to suffer your way through life. You can work towards just letting those things go and letting them be. And, a lot of what we're working towards, I think we all fall into the trap of capitalism from time to time and wanting the newest car, wanting the best looking clothes, wanting the big house, wanting the boat, wanting all of those things. But, if you are just working to have those things, you're missing out on the good stuff.
There are some people who work and they love their job and working brings them joy and happiness. And it doesn't feel like they're sacrificing other things.
Of course.
I don't necessarily think there are that many people like that. I think it's finding the right balance for you. And, we're a coaching company. Like, we coach people on improving their nutrition, their lifestyle, their health. We're not saying, live like you're going to die tomorrow, because that's different. To a degree can be reckless, because the chances are we're going to live for many more days. It's so much about balance, and it's understanding what your balance is and trying new things and reflecting and staying curious as to what makes you feel good and feels balanced, and understanding that there's life to live, but also that you're living in your life. It's as simple as an example as going out to eat. Like, do you pass up a communal opportunity to eat food that brings people together because you have these health goals? Some days you do and some days you don't. It's a decision for you and only you. And I think that's how we coach as a company. It's not, put your life on hold so that you can lean out. It's managing all of the goals in your life, including living it. You can't even define what the balance is because it's different for everybody.
Yeah. But like, choosing to pursue balance is choosing a harder path. Like, a balanced life is a challenged life because you are having to constantly make decisions and find perspective and assess what's important to you. It's on a rolling basis. Like, it's almost easier to be very rigid and closed off and, nope, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm doing it. The answer is no, or the answer is yes. That can really simplify things, but there's no protocol for life. There's no, like, if you do this, then this will happen, and then this will happen, and then this will happen. Like, there are no guarantees. There's no way, as much as we want there to be this like perfect path to health and happiness and wealth and all of these things, there just isn't. Even if that path existed, is that really what we're here for, what we want? Like, I think we're all just sort of driven by this ingrained competitiveness that is a byproduct of this very capitalist society in which we live. But it works against our nature, which is to connect with one another, to share what is human, which is sharing in joys and sharing in sadness and suffering, and not seeing your peers as competitors, but rather as peers and community members and support systems. To live that way is very counter to the way that our society pushes us. It takes work to do that. But ultimately, and like, this is what you said, we've kind of been talking about this a lot. And it was at the end of that caption on that post was, most people are not remembered for the things that they achieve. Like, there are the select few who have an impact that is so big that that is actually what they're remembered for. Most of us, the way that people will remember us will be gone in a generation after our death. The people who remember us will be gone. And so then what we're remembered for is the way that we treat other people and the way that we make them feel, and our connection, while we're here, and what we pay forward. And I think sometimes it's really important to remember that.
Yeah, I think, like, I think about Abby, and this obviously isn't about me, but of course this is a podcast about what I feel and think. I mean, her life, and the more that I read about her and learn about her, she's inspired me to kind of like give back, be someone that brings people together. it's hard for me as a shy person, somewhat introverted, but even if I'm not the one to initiate a conversation or to meet somebody, you can still show up for them. And one thing that I'm doing this week is trying to show up for the people who I know who were impacted. And a couple of my clients knew Abi quite well, and I want to make sure that they're okay. And I don't cold call people very often, but I think a lot of people in these moments worry about saying the right thing. There is no right thing. And I know this because I've been that person. Just being there and saying that you're there is the right thing. Just calling and saying, I don't know what to say. I'm here for you. Because I didn't get that when I lost my sister from a lot of people that I thought were my friends and close to me. And again, it's age related, but yeah, it just taught me to not be that way. And even though it's uncomfortable, it's human, it's life. And we need to be there for each other. And sometimes I think about this podcast and I'm like, I really just don't want it to come across in the wrong way. Like we're, I'll just say it, like using that experience for a business. I'm sure maybe somebody will think that, but it's a way for people to be vulnerable and connect. And I want other people to feel like open and connect and use these experiences in their own life to grow. I don't know. It feels good to share this stuff.
I mean, I think the takeaway can be that Abi was a person who did have an impact on us. When I think about the Run Club here, that was a model, or at least something that I thought of when we started thinking about doing these in-person events and bringing our community together. Like Stag's Leap is something that has always been in the front of my mind. And Abi is a person, not the most outspoken, like not super loud, not very boisterous, not a like supreme extrovert. And often these are the people who find themselves in like community leadership roles. So also, not only does that speak to her ability to make connections, like actual deep community connections with people, but it is inspiring for me and probably for you as well, as people who are on the quieter side and struggle sometimes with large events and the idea of being in a really public leadership role. Like there is an avenue for the softer spoken folks to have a really big community impact. She certainly has. And I mean, I could go on and on about that, but we're sitting here talking about Abi because Abi had an impact, even though we weren't as close with her as other people were.
I think this is embarrassing to admit and not the way life works, obviously. I struggle not to qualify things, but there was part of me that thought of the Hunger Games and I was like, couldn't we have just sacrificed someone else? I don't know who.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel unfair in many ways when like someone like that is lost. Loss of life is never okay, but it often, too often is people who you're like, but why? Why them? It doesn't make any sense. It's not fair. It's like
people who are religious will say God had a reason. And to that I say, fuck off.
Yeah.
We don't like getting religious on this podcast. It doesn't provide comfort.
It is the ultimate gaslight, I think. It is. I would rather not sit with you in these feelings. So God had a reason.
I think that just goes to acceptance. It's accepting that was what happened and you move on. And yeah, life is hard. It's hard sometimes.
And when it starts to feel really easy and great, it's hard. Yeah, I'm not really sure how to close this out.
I honestly would say just what Mike said in the post, which is like, go outside, go for a run, take your dogs or pet some dogs. And like, honestly, just like stop and really take a good look at what you're doing and make sure it's the way that you want to be living and be grateful for what you have. That's what I got from this. And hopefully that's what other people got from it because I think it's valuable.
If you're in the Fernie community and you're listening and you know Abi or know of her or know someone who knew her, you're probably feeling the same way. And I know it's been a few weeks, and if you've felt like you've recovered a little and we've brought some things out in you, I'm really sorry, but we are here with you. And the neat thing about being in a very small community is while everyone is deeply impacted, I think that the opportunity to come together and share stories, share memories, and find ways to commemorate her in the future, I think is going to be something that is really healing. So yeah, thank you for listening. And Abi Moore, we're going to miss you a lot. We'll see you on the trails.